و دعوت میکنم از سینماگر برجسته جهانی آقای الیور استون که به صحنه بیاد. الیور پلیز.
Shall I translate first, okay? Yeah. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure once again to be here in your presence. I hope it's going to be another amazing workshops. I hear that you've had some wonderful workshops here in the past few days in Cinema Palestine. And this year, in this edition of Fajr Film Festival, we've had a set of wonderful international cineasts as our special international guests. And today, a world-famous filmmaker, somebody who needs no introduction, is with us. Mr. Oliver Stone is here. But the reason for this delay is that we were supposed to, I believe we were supposed to start about 3 or 3:30, but he was taken out of courtesy to see the Museum of Repentance, and it took a while. And now, of course, he's going to talk maybe about the mental effects of visiting that museum, and then we're going to start the workshop. I hope it's going to be a wonderful event again.
من البته یه توضیح دیگه هم بدم. به هر حال آقای الیور استون رو شما همه با ایشون آشنا هستین، احتمالاً با کارهاشون. واقعاً درخواست خود ایشون بود که یک جاهایی رو ببینن، از جمله همین موزه‌ای که گفتم. دیروز هم ایشون موزه صلح رو دیدن و خیلی به دقت سوال می‌کردن که این به هر حال مواد شیمیایی که استفاده شده چه تأثیری داشته روی آدم‌ها و این مسائل انسانی براشون خیلی حساس، دقیق اینها رو میپرسیدن و فکر میکنم که امروز هم اونجا رو باز در ارتباط با همون خواستن با توجه به تاریخ ما یه نگاهی هم به اون موزه داشته باشن. حالا میتونین از خودشون هم بعداً سوال کنین. اوکی. Oliver, I give the mic to you and yeah.
All right, okay, I get the point. I mean, nothing's planned. Got it. Okay. It takes a long time to sort of settle all the rules here. So listen, I assume you all speak English because, you know, we're not going to, no, he's going to do a nice job, but I'm going to speak it, I'm going to try to feel in English my way through this thing. First of all, I'm going to ask questions of you. I'd like you guys to ask questions. But let me just say quickly that my time here in Iran has been spent very well. I think my wife and I have seen a lot from starting in Isfahan and Kershan, which is amazing, and then it's quite, the people of Tehran have been very kind and very warm-hearted, smiling a lot. We walked to the bazaar today, and we saw many signs of, as I said yesterday, softness and peace, and a lot of nice people. And I'm worried about you because I see the threats you face from many countries on both sides. And I worry for you because you may be too soft. But you tell me you've been through a big war in 1980 to 88. I saw a film about that. And I know at the Peace Museum I was horrified to see how much gas was thrown into Iran and how many victims there were. Although the numbers are still, they're floating around. I'd like to get the exact numbers. If anybody in the audience knows the exact numbers or something closer, please give them to me later before we leave here or in the Q&A. But the chemical warfare thing, very important to realize that in America, in the West, we talk about chemical warfare, we talk about Syria, we talk about, I believe, these false flag operations. We throw chemical warfare around like it's a horrible thing, and yet we ignore the fact that we and many European and South American countries, because of us, through proxy, have supplied Iraq, the old Iraq, under Hussein, with chemicals warfare, mustard gas, and various poison gases that were used. I want to make a couple of quick points, and I don't want to make it too long, but this mustard gas, this use of chemical gas, you have to keep reminding people that it was thrown into Iran and destroyed many people, scarred, wounded. You have a walking wounded population of people who've suffered greatly. greatly from this war. And people forget that. And America led the charge because we know that Mr. Reagan wanted Iraq to attack Iran. We know that. And we have to keep reminding people. You do too. I say this in conjunction with my visit to the torture museum there, Savak, which is sickening. I say it's sickening, but I've been to many places like this all over the world. I saw the Nazi camps. I went there. I went to Cambodia, same time as was going on here in the 1970s. They killed so many people. In those prisons, you didn't get out of the prison. Tui Sleng was called. Everybody died. But torture was incredible everywhere in Cambodia. I've seen torture in South America. You know, I'm used to it, but I'd never get used to it. It's so awful. It's an awful thing to do. And when Mr. Trump says so lightly, you know, hey, we're going to do some more waterboarding and shit like that, it's disgusting. Which brings me to my last point, which is don't forget, memory is crucial. Your older generation must remember and pass it on, and young people, because many of you are film students, put this on film, record it, document it. I say this because I was very upset yesterday to go and see a film about the Shah of Iran. It was a documentary made apparently with government resources, with using all the film archive that you have, and it was supposed to be about the Shah from 1940s to 79. The film was a mess, and what I know as an American of your revolution is far more than what I saw in that film. And it was called Heavenly Kingly Treasure or something like that. Do you remember?
Royal Inheritance.
Royal Inheritance. Yeah. But you know, if Iran doesn't remember it's what happened under the Shah, you're fucked. There's no way. It's like, you understand what I'm saying? Germany after World War II learned its lesson. They went to school, they learned. Japan, they didn't. In Japan, they don't know anything about World War II. It's very crucial for history to continue and to be told properly with the truth. For example, in the movie of Savak is mentioned, yes, and the coup in 1953 is mentioned, but they don't even really make it clear that the CIA and MI5 or whatever, 6, is behind this coup. They don't make it clear at all. It's very confusing. But we know very clearly that America had a grip on this thing. They were running the show. And you don't know that from this documentary. You're lost without that. When the Shah goes into exile, they don't even mention that America had a tremendous controversy about letting the Shah come to America. And many people like Kissinger wanted him to come, but Americans didn't want the Shah to come and so forth and so on. It was, again, politically shunted off. So you're not even telling this to the Iranian people. This is what's upsetting. And I'm told, I talked about this with Amir and with you, and you tell me that there is no strong documentaries about this material. I'm stunned. You should all look at Untold History of the United States. We have more information there about your Iran than I saw in this documentary. That's my point.
آقای کامیار محسنین همکار خوبم که قرار بود این جلسه رو در خدمت ایشون باشیم اومد و از ترافیک رها پیدا کرد، همینطوری که ایشون هم تو موزه گیر کرده بودن. به هر حال من خواهش میکنم از آقای کامیار محسنین که بیان اینجا و در زمان پرسش و پاسخ ایشون همراه شما باشن و همراه آقای استون. So Kamiar is coming to join you and I'm going to leave and watch from downstairs. Thank you very much. Okay, see you back. Yes, sir.
Hey, Kamiar. How are you?
سلام عرض می‌کنم خدمت تمام حضار. خیلی خوشحالیم که در خدمتتون هستیم، در خدمت آقای الیور استون هستیم و امیدوارم که جلسه پرسش و پاسخ خوبی داشته باشیم و اصولاً بحث‌های سینمایی خوبی مطرح بشه توی این جلسه‌ای که در خدمتتون هستیم.
I want to say hello to my friends and Mr. Stone, who I used to love his movies from from the time that I was a student in 20 years ago. I have screened many of your films in my classes, for example, U-Turn. I have especially a question about U-Turn, and I prefer, myself personally, prefer to see you as a filmmaker, not as a politician, not as someone who talk about politics all the time, but a very good filmmaker, I think, in my opinion, is the best in the world. I have a question about U-Turn. It's very, very, very important for me. For example, that in U-Turn, for example, can we consider the characters, different characters played by Sean Penn, Jennifer Lopez, and the others? Can we consider them as the Freud pattern, ego, superego? For example, we see Sean Penn as superego. We see mechanic Daryl as shadow. We see, for example, the role that Joaquin Phoenix played in the film as id, ego, superego. Can we consider this pattern in the characters in the U-Turn? And at the end, I congratulate you about your excellent movies. Many people think that your films in previous decades was better, but still I think that your films is very good now. Even the Alexander, I think if my friends see the Alexander in details, it's not anti-Iranian movie. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, if your theory about Freud, there's only ego, superego, and id. That's 3 characters, but there's 7 major characters in U-Turn, so it doesn't work. It's a psychological theory that I never thought about Freud. This is a dark film noir. You know what film noir is? In which, in real tradition of film noir, every key player dies. There's no hope. No hope. We've been cheating on film noir in America and making people live, but in real film noir, everyone dies. And the characters are very real to me because I know many of them. And if you look at the movie under many different levels, it's about incest more than anything, because if you look at America, do you know what incest is here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Doing it with related people.
Yeah, what I'm saying is it's inbred. In many parts of America, in the rural areas of Arizona, for example, and New Mexico, and also we can talk about Texas, and certainly the South. I've been in all these places, and you drive into the back areas, you're going to find a lot of strange behavior, you're going to find a lot of strange-looking people, and a lot of stupidity. And I saw that, and I think U-Turn acknowledges that, as you see. There's also an American Indian theme against the white man raping and abusing the American Indian, the Apache. Sean Penn plays a complete loser. There's no hope of redemption for him, but he keeps trying to crawl out of the bucket like a scorpion trying to crawl out of the bucket, but everybody gets pulled down in the end. That's my first, and I'll go to the other parts. As to my career, later career, I've been working very hard as ever. I'm very proud, especially of World Trade Center, very complicated film, did very well. I'm very proud of, these films are not available in Iran, that's a problem, but you can see them somewhere, I'm sure. I'm also very proud of W, which was the story of George Bush, the son, W. Make sure they understand what W means. Yes. It's the son, W. That's the way they say it in Texas. Yeah. But, okay, W. Because in that movie, and I talked about this yesterday at the press conference, there's the seminal events of the Middle East are discussed. And I like to marry politics and entertainment. And I can't think of a better scene than the 12-minute scene in W, the National Security Council, sitting around the table, all the big shots. They discuss the Middle East and the neoconservative plan to regime change 7 countries. And among them, of course, is Iraq. Then they talk about Syria. They talk about Lebanon. And among other things, they end up Iran. And that is the prize, the big O. Mr. Cheney, the president, vice president, played by Richard Dreyfuss, thank you, points to the map. He says, "This is the prize." And then someone in the room asks, what is your exit strategy? And he says, "There is no exit strategy." Now you have to understand, this is a huge prize, Iran. This is the Eurasia. And I'm trying to make this entertaining. It doesn't have to be in conflict with politics. This is entertainment. Study W, see it again, understand it, and you'll get it. Because you can make politics like JFK or Nixon fascinating. You can also make dirty little movies like U-Turn fascinating. It doesn't matter. Subject should never stop you. You can take the Iranian Revolution and make it fascinating. Nothing should be off the table. And if anything, the American movie business is scared of anything that is dangerous or controversial or critical of U.S. foreign policy. This is my point. And you're not. And if you allow this breach to exist between politics and entertainment, you're creating a false breach, and you're not. And it's a disservice to the people of the world. Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. Footnote: I'm very proud of my last movie. Maybe you have not seen it in Iran. It's Snowden. This movie is extremely interesting, dramatic point for students, because it is a combination, again, of politically dangerous material. This is a man who was not popular for most of America. And at the same time, I think it's a thriller. And I have to marry these two. What do I have to work with? I don't have a gun. There's no guns. There's no violence. There's no murder. All I have is a computer screen and a few characters, correct? And it's a story that goes through 12 years. A computer screen. I hate computer screens. They're boring. We've seen computer movies. I've tried to make this movie special because every time you go to that computer screen, it means something because you know what's going on in the story. This is a very important obstacle. So this is a good study, if you're a film student, of how to take a subject without violence, and my hero, by the way, is a nerd. There's nothing worse than a nerd. You know what a nerd is? In Iranian, is there a word?
Yeah. Do we have a word
A
for
nerd is a guy
Everybody
who's
knows
boring,
nerd, yeah.
who has no personality, and he's not a hero in any conventional sense of the word. He's a hero in his ideas and in his courage. That's Snowden. And I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'm proud of the last 18 of what I've done in the 21st century. I've really worked hard. I've made 6 features, 7 features, and I've made 8 documentaries. And one of these documentaries, The Untold History of the United States, was 12 hours long, and it is a very accurate and I hope dramatic picture of the American lies that we've heard since we've been growing up in school. This is a monstrous project, as important to me as JFK and Nixon and all those movies that you loved, and Born on the 4th of July. I love them too. But we're dealing with a government that has much changed since the 20th century. Our government has, from Mr. Bush to now, with Mr. Trump, from 2000 to now, it's become a monster. It's much worse. So we have a bigger problem, and you have to understand what I'm wrestling with in my country. Also, commercially, it's difficult to get movies made. Snowden was rejected by every American studio.
Hello, Master Stone. My question is, since the question is something that you or other political filmmakers, if we could call you, could answer. You know, when you make a political film, there will be obstacles for your future projects. And because probably what you are going to mention in your film is going to bother people at the centers of power. So we'd like to know how would you deal with that? And when you're making your film, what do you care most about? Is it going to be about the documentary and fact part of your film, or is it like the artistic side of your film and the audience interest? Which one would you use? And in a bigger size, do you believe that cinema should serve politics or politics should serve cinema?
I am not a politician. I am not an activist. I don't go out there and lobby. What I do most of the time is I'm a dramatist. You know what the word means? Dramatist. Dramatist. It's an important word. The Greeks understood this word. And the great dramatists I admire would be, it starts with the Greeks. And if you remember, they had historians also came along about the same time, Herodotus and in fact, you could argue that Sophocles and Aeschylus preceded Herodotus. And but it's about the same time they're born, Historia and Dramatis. So it's very important, but you see, the dramatists can also tell history in a way that sometimes the historians can miss, because the historians, every historian has to omit and put the facts the way he would like them to be. He edits the story. Great historians tell a great story. Great dramatists tell a great story. It's not a conflict. It's not a conflict. And what I do when I make a JFK, is I'm taking a huge chunk of history and condensing it, because I have to. But a historian may not be able to have to do that, but he will still make, certainly on the JFK history, we know there's many disagreements, and the historians have been very weak, very weak. The researchers have been very strong. The young researchers, such as yourselves, who do things, who do the work, they have been terrific. And now there's 3 generations of researchers that have penetrated more deeply than ever the mystery. So this is, it's not a conflict, I repeat, as I did to that gentleman. What was your question? Okay, go ahead with that.
Now, do you believe that cinema should serve politics or politics should serve cinema?
Go ahead. For example, do you think that blowing off the president's head in the middle of Dallas in the day at high noon is a good story? No, it horrifies people. It's a sacred story, but it's been completely screwed up. I took that story and I twisted it around and I made people think about it another way. That's great drama. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's great drama. Make people rethink the narrative of the American century. I tried to make Americans rethink it in the untold history of the United States. We have been lying to ourselves for a long time, more than 100 years of bullshit. We grew up with bullshit, schools. And I'm trying to tell another story. It's very hard to go against, but one day maybe they will remember my JFK instead of their JFK, we hope. But there is no conflict there. Do you think a Vietnam veteran ending up in a wheelchair, castrated, is a good story to tell? Do you think young people, young girls like that, to see Tom Cruise in a wheelchair? I knew I was going to lose a lot of the audience. But it was a great story. Cruise loved it because it's a powerful story. Don't be afraid of this.
I think before moving to the next question, some while ago you were the president of the jury in Busan, and you gave the major prize to the film Blockage.
Yes.
And the people from the film are here. Do you like to talk about the film a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now in English, or do you want to ask the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is a great case of an Iranian film, and I've seen many, but I don't know the names through the years because I see them in different places over the years. And I knew Abbas, names are tough. It's like Chinese names for me. But Blockage at Busan, we gave a prize, the jury, international competition, to 2 films, co-prize, both excellent. One was a South Korean film. Beautiful story about schoolgirls with suicides in South Korea, which is a big issue. And the other film we gave to Blockage. This gentleman, the director, took a story that is human. We were shocked to see that in Tehran there was a freedom that we didn't expect to deal with corruption And we saw corruption at every level of Iranian society, lower class, even middle, lower, and middle class. Everybody was corrupted. The story starts with this nice young man who is a municipal police officer. Is that correct?
Okay, municipal agent, yeah.
Who lives in the middle of the corruption, and how he has to get on with his life. And his story goes to another person, to another person, to another person, to another person. It's a beautiful, like a bicycle thief. It becomes a vivid portrait of a society dealing with all the problems we recognize throughout the world, China, Philippines, United States, Russia, corruption. How many people in the audience have seen Blockage?
چند نفر از این جمعیت این فیلم سد معبر رو دیدن؟
I would say 50%.
فکر کنم
How many
50%.
of you thought it was as good as I think it is? Please raise your
کدوماتون
hand.
فکر میکنی به همین اندازه که من میگم فیلم خوبی بوده؟
You got about, I'd say 70% of the
فکر
liked
کنم
it.
70% اون 50%
And the
با من
other
هم عقیده.
30% thought it was what? I see that every day. What? What was their reaction?
سینما.
I don't know. What's the answer to that?
This is the answer.
Hello,
It's
Mr.
the ordinary that is all, if it's well done. The ordinary is what's extraordinary.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Stone, and thank you for your time. I was in your press conference yesterday, and when you wanted to talk about the bad guys.
He would like you to speak Farsi, please.
Okay.
متوجه نمیشه. Well, Mr. Stone, I was present in your press conference yesterday, and you talked a little bit about bad people, or if we want to be more specific, bad presidents of the United States. But you mainly focused on George W. Bush and the Bushes and Mr. Trump, and you rarely spoke about Mr. Obama. Does it mean that you think of Mr. Obama as a good man, or a lot of people expected that since Mr. Obama was the very first colored president of the United States, you would make a film about him? And there was so much controversy about him. So,
No, I wouldn't. Do you want to change that? No, I wouldn't make a film about him. And that's presumptuous of you to think that. I was very clear that from 2001 to 2018, the United States has developed, has implemented, and executed regime change in the Middle East. This was a plan that was put into effect in 2001 by the neoconservatives who had control in the George W. Bush cabinet. Very important that you recognize this. Their goal was to destabilize 7 nations in the Middle East and Northern Africa, including Libya. They've done that. They've done Libya. They've done Iraq. They are working on Syria, and they've done a hell of a good job at that. And unfortunately, as you know, their big prize is Iran. That's the issue, and that's what you're missing the point. These 3 presidents, including Obama, and I said this yesterday, are part of that plan. Obama may be more humanitarian, he speaks better, he's a Democrat or whatever, he's colored, but he's still part of that empire. Nothing has changed. The strategy doesn't change. It is a war state. They are serious about this issue. They are serious about destroying your country. They believe in the concept, the neoconservative concept of creative destruction. Creative destruction. Have you heard of such a paradox? They think it's a good thing. They can wreck Iraq. They can wreck Libya. They can put terrorists everywhere. Daesh can start. They can be involved with that. Israel likes that. Saudi Arabia likes that. They're playing for keeps here. And you guys talk about Obama and Trump and this, and it's not a big difference. There's no difference. Please see the big picture. The neoconservatives are in power in the United States. It's their program.
I don't agree.
سلام عرض میکنم. من چند تا سوال از سینمایی داشتم از آقای استون. حتی با اینکه میتونم هم انگلیسی بپرسم ولی ترجمه میدم فارسی بگم که شما وسط کارتون رو بتونید بکنید.
Okay, Mr. Stone, my first question for you would be, since you have worked with some of the greatest filmmakers in the history of cinema, like Michael Cimino, Quentin Tarantino, and Coppola, specifically on Midnight Express, that I believe is your best script ever. I would like you to tell us a little bit about your experiences from working with these directors and how was it working with these people. And the second question was that since we know that you've been involved with the Vietnam War and you've made 4 amazing films about the brutality of this war, which one of these 4 films have been the most difficult for you to make? Whether it's from a cinematic point of view or just remembering those bitter memories. Because for me personally, seeing those films, The Platoon, which is an absolute masterpiece, is so painful to watch. So what do you think about that? 2 questions for now. He's got more.
Mr. Cimino, I worked with, he was responsible for producing Platoon in the beginning because Platoon, it was written in 1976, but it was rejected and not made by any filmmakers because they didn't want to depress the American public. So I was very depressed by that, and it was painful. Years later, Cimino said, look, I love Platoon. I'd love you to make it. You make it, Oliver, and I'll produce it. And it was his initiative that got it started again in 1983, in return for which I did Year of the Dragon screenplay for Michael. Working with him was not easy because Michael's difficult. I never was on the set. I was working on something else. But on the screenplay, he was fine. He gave me... but, you know, the problem with that screenplay was that it was fucked up by the producer, Dino De Laurentiis, who kept interfering and putting his ideas in, which are 1950s Italy. So it didn't work for me. But at the same time, Michael, unfortunately, was derailed by Dino. And Dino not only did not make Platoon, did not make it, but he kept the script. So the son of a bitch, I sued him. Really bad guy. I sued him. And he would never have given the script back. In other words, he would have held on to Platoon. I sued him to get it back because the case we brought was we were going to prevent Block Year of the Dragon from being released. Why? Because I had not been paid my full fee. That's typical Dino. So we fucked him and we got our script back. As to other directors I worked with I have not had great experiences. John Milius did not collaborate with me at all on Conan the Barbarian. He wanted to do it his way, and John has a big ego. But he's funny, and we had a lot of laughs, but he's totally egotistical. 1. 2, Alan Parker honored the script. He said this was a great script when I finished writing the first draft and second draft. And he basically made that movie. But as a person, he was a miserable son of a bitch. I was never invited to the set. I never went. And he was strange man. And I think it was a lot of British-American tension. The British resented the American influence on Midnight Express because the producer was also, Peter Guber was American, and the British producer resented that. So there was a British-American tension throughout the film.
در خصوص کارگردانی کامیار جان، اگه من چیز رو میس کردم لطفاً بهم بگو. تجربه کار کردن با جان میلیس بود که در واقع خواست به روایت خودش فیلم کانند باربریان رو بسازه و البته آدم خیلی بامزه، کلی با هم میخندیم و اینا، اما خیلی مغرور و متکبر هستش. آلن پارکر هم گفت فیلمنامه فوق‌العاده عالیه، اساساً همون فیلم رو گرفت خودش ساخت، ولی شخصیتش اونم یه آدم حرومزاده‌ای بود. هیچ وقت یک بارم منو دعوت نکرد سر صحنه و البته منم نرفتم. و فکر کنم خیلی تنش و اینای تنش آمریکایی بریتانیایی در خصوص فیلم قطار سری و سیر نیمه شب یا میدنایت اکسپرس وجود داشت، چون در مورد احساس می‌کردن بریتانیایی‌ها که آمریکا خیلی زیادی دیگه توی این پروژه بریتانیایی اعمال نفوذ کرده.
I never worked with Francis Coppola. I like him very much, but he did Apocalypse Now, but I did not work with him. I worked with Brian De Palma, I think you're thinking of, on Scarface. Oh, now, listen, I learned a lot because the producer Marty Bregman, and the actor, Al Pacino, wanted me very much to work with Brian. Brian was, that's a whole story. You know, Scarface went 3 months over budget. It was supposed to be done in 3 months. It went 6 months. It cost too much money at that time, way too much. There was so much pressure on Brian to finish this movie in 3 months, but he couldn't do it. There was problems between Al and Brian. I was in the middle. Al was using me as his ally, and I loved Al. I think he's a great actor. I worked with him again on Any Given Sunday years later. I think Al is a great actor, and he has a great instinct. Brian is another kind of director. I learned a lot from watching him, but his energy level is much lower than mine. He moves at a different pace. As you know from my few days here in Iran, I like to move, right? Brian is slow. So 6 months, it was a long time to be on a set, a long time. So as you see, every film is a struggle. And most films are not, unless they're bullshitting you, that most films don't go down easy, and there's always fights. It is that way, and that's how a film gets made, out of the struggle, the different identities, the independent clash of egos. As to my 3 Vietnam films, I like them all. I'm glad you like Platoon. It's the most visceral. It's based on my own combat experiences. But my second film is very important to me too, and my third one, very important, because the second one is based on the Ron Kovic memoir. Ron Kovic was paralyzed in the war, and I really wanted to tell his story because it was about before the war in America in the 1950s, during the war, and after the war, what it was like in the 1970s when Ron came back. It's a very moving story. It's one of the great movies with Tom Cruise, I think. The third movie is equally important to me. It was a gigantic epic based on the story of a woman, a Vietnamese woman on the other side. So you can see, you get a Vietnamese point of view of the conflict. She ends up, she works with the Viet Cong or the NVA, and then she works with the Vietnamese army. She's torn and tortured. She's tortured pretty badly, put in prison. And she marries an American soldier, Tommy Lee Jones. You think it's all going to end very happily. She goes to America. No. It turns out that Tommy Lee Jones carries the virus, the sickness, back from Vietnam. So her story goes on, and at the end, she goes back and forth between America and Vietnam, and you must see the movie one day. Heaven and Earth, please.
The final question. Okay, Mr. Stone. Well, the question is, when Alexander the Great beats Darius III, and the army of Iran spreads around and kind of runs away and stuff, it doesn't show the entrance of Alexander in Iran and how he sets fire to the Persepolis. And he goes straight to Babylon, and the people have a very warm welcome for him. In there, he kind of fells the symbol of Iran, the Faravahar, okay? So I want to know, my first question is, what was the historic source that you used in order to make this film, and why you didn't show the scene in which his men go and fire the Persepolis? And the second question, in your interviews, you mentioned that 20 minutes of the film has been cut in the original version. So I want to know if anything about this event, Alexander coming to Persepolis.
Okay, sure. The sources we used were Robin Lane Fox's biography and the 6 original sources that were written in 200 AD, and that was many years ago now, 200 BC. The original sources were 6 of them, and Robin Lane Fox, and I read everything else, and I read Arian. The Battle of Gaugamela was, you have to realize we have to cut, the film was 3 hours, the final film, let's make one thing straight. The original film was 2 hours and 50-some minutes. That was by Warner Brothers standards. It had to be less than 3 hours. I should have fought it. I lost that battle, and the film was released. They also asked me to cut all the sex scenes between Bagoas and Alexander, and the sex scenes with Hephaestion and Alexander as much as possible. They don't want any gay sex, and they hated the violence, and they wanted very little violence, less violence. So to meet that standard in 2004, the film was compromised, and it's my fault. In 2014, the version called The Ultimate Cut, 2014, that's 10 years later, I added back 3 hours and 26 minutes. So I added approximately 30-some minutes to the original cut. I deepened the story, and I had an intermission. And this movie, to me, is the one that moves my heart. In the Battle of Gaugamela, and by the way, we have to cut things, and we cut not only the Persepolis, but we also cut the important scene when Alexander has to go to Egypt to be anointed son of God, son of Zeus, son of Zeus-Ammon. He goes to Egypt. Many important scenes had to be left out to make this movie 3 hours and 26 minutes. I mean, otherwise the movie would have been 5 hours. I couldn't have done it. At the Battle of Gaugamela, it's a condensation of 3 battles that he fought against Darius. And we took the information from 3 battles and put it into one. At Gaugamela, the truth is, and this is a fact, that Darius fled the battle. He had no reason to flee. He lost his nerve because the Persians far outnumbered the Greeks. It was a stupendous moment. The Persians fought very valiantly, very well, and Darius lost his nerve. He fled in his chariot, and the battle ended on that note. Alexander vowed that he would track Darius down because it was very important for Alexander to capture the essence of the emperor. He did not want to win Persia with shame. He tracked Darius after he entered Babylon, and he was received beautifully well in Babylon, whatever you say. Beautifully well. It was tremendous reception. After he left Babylon to track Darius in the mountains of Bactria, it was a tremendous campaign. It took a year. Darius was ultimately betrayed by Bessus, and Alexander found Darius with his stabbed in the back, as we showed in the film. Alexander honored the king by taking his cloak, his royal cloak, and covering Darius's body with it. He gave full respect to Darius in Babylon. He honored his mother of Darius and his wives. He even married one of his wives later, or two of the wives later. And he wanted, Alexander's idea was not to plunder the East and bring the treasure home to the West, as all the previous Greek heroes had done, as his father had planned. No, he wanted to make a larger empire with Persian soldiers, Persian army as part of his army. He wanted a multicultural, international world, multipolar. He was a great visionary. He saw the United Nations, so to speak, of his time. And we tried to give that vision in this movie. He paid for that vision because the Greeks, the Macedonian army, turned on him eventually because they said, "You're crazy. All you're doing is giving more and more honors to the Asians, and you're ignoring us. We want to rape, we want to loot, we want to plunder, we want to take it back to Greece." Interesting story. Much tension. Just to close out, when Alexander died in Babylon, and the Favrahar is shown above his head in the fan, if you look at the last scene very closely, it merges at the end with the Greek Zeus, the eagle. The Favrahar and the eagle come to take Alexander away. This is a man who was truly one of the first international citizens of the world, a man who loved peace too and wanted it for the world. His plan was to go west with his remaining energy. He was only 33 years old, to go west. And you know what he wanted to conquer? I'll tell you, Saudi Arabia was in his plans, and it would have been a good idea. And he wanted to go on to Spain and out to the Atlantic, wherever that was. He didn't know where the Atlantic ended. Okay? Great dreamer.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all the audience, all my friends. We are running out of time, so we should close the ceremony. Thank you so much.